Hi, today is Thursday, March 30th, 2017, and this is A Swede Speaks. And by the way, it's the fourth day of the fifth week of Lent. Uh, and uh, and now I'm going to talk about, how the socialist utopia of Scandinavia works compared with Scandinavians or Scandinavian descended people living in America and some other things related to this. Because supposedly Scandinavia is it's like the good example of socialism. Everything works fine around here. Everyone is happy. Everybody is well fed. There is no poverty, etc., etc. That's what they're telling you. And before I digress too much, I'm going to quote Bernie Sanders. A few years ago, I think it was in 2015, that would make sense. He said, and I am quoting, "When I talk about democratic socialism, I am not looking at Venezuela. I am not looking at Cuba. I am looking at countries like Denmark and Sweden." The funny thing about this is that actually the Prime Minister of Denmark, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, had to renounce this by saying Denmark is not socialist, which could be discussed, but I get the Prime Minister's point. He didn't because he did not like how Denmark was portrayed as a socialist country in the American political debate, and especially not when it was used as a good example of how good and nice socialism is. What keeps Denmark going is the same thing that what keeps Sweden and Norway going. Private enterprise, private business. And it keeps on going even though it is harmed by heavy taxes, it is harmed by lots of regulations, so it doesn't work as good as it could do. And when it comes to poverty, I mentioned that, the idea that there is no poverty in our countries. Well, there is no absolute poverty. There is no real starvation. But of course there are people who are considered poor in relative terms. Of course there is. Because there was a Scandinavian politician who once told Milton Friedman that there is no poverty in Scandinavia. I think it might have been a Swedish politician. And Milton Friedman replied, "That's interesting. There is no poverty among Scandinavians in America either." I think that's a pretty funny story. There have been some comparisons between, for instance, Swedish Americans, people in America with Swedish ancestry, and Swedes living in Sweden. And they found out that Swedish Americans in general have higher incomes, higher living standard than many people in America. I think they were 53% above the national average or something like that at median wage. I think so. And they were also above the living standard of the Swedes living in Sweden. So I don't think it's got anything to do with the welfare state. Or, let's put it this way. A big welfare state works sort of fine in Sweden, although it starts working less good now. But that could be, because Swedes still have their work ethic. And I mean, there are all those things that have been keeping Swedes together. And that it was just when I grew up in Sweden, I mean, you could, if you wanted to, you could live your entire life on benefits, but it was not acceptable. I mean, no one would accept that. Even if you would accept it yourself, people would tell you to get up and go look for a job. And because the Swedes who went to America were not the rich ones, well, one or two maybe, but most of the Swedes who went to America were the poor ones. It was really an emigration of people who were desperate to get a better life. And now these poor Swedes live better than the Swedes in Sweden. Isn't that interesting? I also found a comparison between Danish Americans and Danes in Denmark, and it told us the same thing. Danish Americans have higher living standard than the Danes in Denmark. I couldn't find a comparison between Norwegian Americans and Norwegians per se. I think there is such a comparison in a book by a Kurdish-Swedish economist named Nima Sanandaji about debunking the socialist utopia of Scandinavia. But I did find a very interesting blog post by, I think she's an American living in Norway, telling you the reasons not to move to Norway. I just got to I think it was point 2, where she told her readers that salaries are not higher in Norway than in the United States. And she goes on to explain this. Yeah, if you have an entry-level job, you will most likely get a higher wage than you get in America. But if you have a professional job, you're gonna make just as good in America, or maybe better. Plus, that the cost of living in most of the United States is lower than it is in Norway. Because Norwegians like to say this, that well, prices are high in Norway because our wages are so high. But that's not really true. Wages are high in Norway, sort of at the bottom of the pyramid, at the entry level. But you're not supposed to stay at the entry level. You're supposed to have a career. You do whatever you want. If you want to be a mailman all your life, that's fine, wonderful, great. No problems about that. But because Scandinavians have this tendency to think about things like now will be forever. If I am poor today, I will be poor tomorrow, and I will be poor in 10 years, and I will be poor in 40 years. And that's why we need all these heavy socialists, because someone has to take care of us. But really, it only harms us. I am not exactly sure how much of the welfare state I would want to defend, but my idea is that almost all of it could be just taken away. Reduce it to a minimum, and then we'll discuss the minimum part that we got left. But really, it only harms people, which this shows. And with Scandinavian socialism, you get these crazy ideas with open borders and stuff, which really does not function well combined with a heavy welfare state. And of course, the Scandinavian countries have historically worked pretty fine, even with all these regulations and taxes and all this stuff, because people have been there have been more or less the same culture, and the minorities have been very small. There have been small minorities of Sami, small minorities of Roma people, etc. But these minorities have been small. But that's no longer the reality in any of the Scandinavian countries. At least not if we by that mean Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. Iceland perhaps, but that's a completely different issue. So, it's self-destructive, really. And by the way, welfare statism, that kind of socialism, is still like a soft totalitarianism. It's a soft kind of socialism. It's not like the hard socialism of the old East Bloc. When it gets bad, you might end up like Brazil, where the economy some recent years has been shrinking, where politicians who promised everything for everyone just ended up grabbing the money for themselves, and things did not get better. Or even worse, you might end up like Venezuela, where bakers have been arrested for making brownies instead of bread, because for some reason it would be the baker's fault that there is that they have problems getting enough bread in Venezuela. It's got nothing to do with the crazy socialist policies. Or maybe it does. I remember that Chavez, he was like the golden boy of the left for many years, or for some years at least. And Chavez should be happy that he died before it collapsed, at least before the collapse became visible for anyone to see. And from the Scandinavian fan club of Chavez, I haven't heard a word for a long time now. I think they are hoping that we are not going to call them out on, hey, you remember what you were saying? But I'm calling them out, and I am not getting any responses. But anyway, to conclude, welfare state is bad. The less of it you have, the better. This is connected with how I think that we should have a working civil society, which would be much better, but let's not digress into that. And if you use Scandinavia to try to prove that socialism is actually working or a good thing, like Bernie Sanders tried, it's a big fail. Fail, fail, fail. It doesn't work in Scandinavia. That's what Scandinavia proves to you. And that's what I have to say about this right now. I would like to thank all the people who are supporting this channel through prayers, through PayPal, through Patreon. I am very grateful for all of it. And if you like this channel, please subscribe so you don't miss anything. I recommend you to press the little bell too, so you get the updates. Share my videos on social media, on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. If you got something to say, please comment. If you like my videos, please like them. And I would also like to encourage you to support this channel. And I will include all the necessary information in the information box below. This is A Swede Speaks. Have a nice day.